In this video, let's talk about statutes, one of the primary authorities, one of our primary sources that we learned about in the previous video. Statutes. Statutes are what people usually think of when you say the law. These are the laws that we learned about in 5th grade social studies when we learned about the 3 branches of government. Remember the legislative branch and the judicial branch and the executive branch. Remember this? The 3 branches of government. And what do these branches do? Well, the legislative branch makes the law, the judicial branch interprets the law, and the executive branch enforces the law. Well, when we say that the legislative branch makes the law, those laws are the laws that we're talking about when we talk about statutes. So how does a statute become a statute? Well, it starts off as what we call a bill. A bill is introduced in Congress or in the state legislature. For a California state statute, the bill becomes law when it's passed by the state legislature. So the bill is introduced into the state legislature and it's passed by the legislature. And then it's signed into law by our chief executive, the governor. All right? This is for just a state statute, but we'll just use California as our example. And then for a federal statute, it's the same thing, except the bill is introduced into Congress, which is the federal legislature. And if it's passed by Congress, it's then signed by the chief executive, the president. Right? If that happens, it becomes a law, it becomes a statute. And once a statute is enacted, it's then published in chronological order. The federal statutes are published in a volume called Statutes at Large. Statutes at Large. That's just the name of the publication for the enacted statute. The California state statutes are published in volumes that are just called session laws. But it's the same idea. It's a publication for all of the enacted statutes that have gone through this process. Now, remember I said that they're all published in chronological order. So of course it's very hard to look up any statutes because, well, being published in chronological order, unless you know the specific date that a certain law was enacted and then published in the session laws or in statutes at large, you'll have a really hard time finding them. So whatever statute is passed by the legislature and then signed into law by the executive, it's just, well, it's the next one on the list. So there's no other organization to the session laws or statutes at large, and it makes it really hard to find any particular statute. So to address this problem, the statutes are also grouped and organized by subject. And they're grouped and organized by subject into something that we call a code. All right, so let's look at the state statutes first. The statutes are published in code books. Right? They go into codes. And each code is a collection of statutes that relate to that particular subject, regardless of when it was passed into law. So these are in chronological order, but then they're reorganized into codes that relate to a particular subject. Now, every state has different codes for its state statutes, but in California we have codes like the Penal Code, the Civil Code, the Health and Safety Code. Okay? There are 29 different codes in California. So thanks to the codes, instead of having to know when the law was passed to be able to find it in the session laws, right? You just need to know what the law is about, its subject, and you can look it up in the code for that subject. Now, federal statutes are a little bit different. Federal statutes, well, they're organized just like the state statutes, but the state statutes are organized in different codes for each subject. The federal statutes are different. The federal statutes are organized into just one code. There's just one federal statutes code, and it's called the United States Code. We sometimes abbreviate the USC. Right? The United States Code is just one code. But then the way this works is the United States Code is then divided into titles. and each title is numbered. So you have Title I, Title II, but for example, Title 17 of the United States Code deals with copyrights. So that's the subject of Title 17 of the United States Code. Let's write title here. Title 17 deals with copyrights. Another example, Title 21 deals with food and drugs. And one more example. Let's say Title 29. Title 29 happens to deal with labor. Right? So these are the titles within the single United States Code. So you can think of each title as being like one of the California state statute codes. It's analogous. Each title is analogous to a state code. It's a collection of statutes that relate to a particular subject. But we just use different terminology for the federal statutes. Instead of calling each grouping a code, we call the entire set the code, the United States Code. And each grouping is called a title. But otherwise, conceptually, it's the same thing.